Hello, SIC paddling community. Welcome to another edition of Brews Boards Badass Women. My name is Casi Rynkowski, and I am the SIC Athlete Team Manager and your host for today. Today, we are going to be talking about adventure paddling. And if you haven't really heard about that style paddling, it's usually considered single or multi-day trip style paddling, usually planned because there's some level of navigation or water elements that we have to deal with. And sometimes done as an A to B or as a circumnavigation. Today's guest has put adventure paddling for women on the map. She's originally from Alaska and now lives in New York City. Yes, I did say Alaska to New York City. She'll talk more about that. She's a certified personal trainer and an ACA Level 2 instructor and guide. She paddled 1,500 miles for 4 months down the East Coast from New York to Miami with her paddling partner, Jules Gismondi, and most recently was the first woman to paddle the length of the Mississippi River solo. That's 2,400 miles for 86 days. Welcome, LouAnne Harris.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, normally we're filming this at night and we are toasting with beers, but today we have a different kind of brew because it's 10 o'clock in the morning. We have a cup of joe. Do you got your cup of joe?
Cold brew.
Cold brew.
No air conditioning in the boathouse, so.
Most excellent. Well, cheers. Enjoy
Cheers.
the brew while we sit and we talk. I'm really excited about this topic. As always, it's our goal at SIC to inspire women to get out there and explore and try new things. And often we highlight accomplishments and we forget that you all have to start somewhere. Just like you started paddling and trying these things a long time ago. Tell us a bit about how you found paddleboarding and why adventure paddling.
Well, I found paddleboarding at MKC here. This is Manhattan Kayak Company where I'm working. So when I started working here 9 years ago, this is going on 10, I started there as a kayak guide, but they were just launching their paddleboard program the summer that I started. So I kind of got in on the ground floor with that and grew with the program. So, and then just along the way, as you're paddling everything, there's a lot of really amazing, accomplished paddlers just in the community here. So talking with all of them and then finding the different opportunities that are in the paddling community to just go kind of do more and more kind of cool things and travel with it. And I always grew up camping and loving to do all that stuff too. So being able to put them together is pretty awesome.
So did you ever have a chance to paddle in Alaska prior to New York City, or was just the sights and sounds of New York City your first experience on a paddleboard?
On a paddleboard, yeah, was in New York. I have paddled in Alaska since, but learned here.
Very interesting for, going from Alaska, everyone thinks adventure paddling, and then you found it in a big city, which is awesome because, paddling in a city is pretty amazing because it's such a juxtaposition with city versus Mother Nature for sure. But what was your first trip that you ever did? Tell us about some of the highlights and some of the challenges that you had on your first adventure paddling trip.
Well, the first adventure paddling trip really kind of jumped into the deep end of the pool because it was the East Coast. There was nothing smaller in front of that. Jules had done a trip. She had done her circumnavigation of Long Island. She was the first woman to do that. And we knew that we wanted to do a trip with each other. So we were just kind of brainstorming what we wanted to do, and someone suggested the East Coast. And we just kind of said, okay, that sounds good, and did it. I had no reason to believe that I was in any way capable of actually doing it. It was one of those things where you just, the opportunity is there and do it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that you guys just jumped right full in on the biggest adventure possible. But what great stories you must have from it. Confidence. A lot of women out there, they could be thinking, and they probably have experienced this too as well. Lacking the confidence for stepping outside your comfort zone, and I know that comes with experience. Going from jumping full in such a big trip, how did you obviously you gained confidence from that, but how did you gain the confidence to do your next trip solo? How did that segue into going at it alone?
Um, after having done the coast, I knew I wanted to do a solo trip because it's just a different animal, right? Because there's just something so comforting about just the fact that you're not alone, right? Even though you have to have the confidence and know that you can handle yourself, you can't expect the other person to take care of you, right? But even if it's just a matter of a bad day, you know that you're not the only one having a bad day. There's just that mutual comfort. And I did know that I knew uh, that no matter what came up, like between the two of us, we could handle it, right? I had that confidence. On a solo trip, that's, you're it. So I knew that I had the experience and the skill set to paddle the river just as a paddler. And I don't know, I don't know if I would say that I mean, obviously I was confident that I could do it, and I was nervous about doing it by myself, but I don't think I really gave a huge amount of thought on the difference between being together and being alone. Obviously it was there, but I didn't dwell on it a lot. I just kind of focused on planning the best that I could, and I was just going to take it one day at a time, because for me, I can't think about this big thing. I wasn't thinking about paddling 2,400 miles by myself. It was like, okay, there's one day, there's the next day, because I know that I can get through a day, right? And then at the end of that day, you think about the next day, and then you get through that day, and then they add up. And it was the same kind of mentality with the coast, right? But you can't think about the whole thing all at once. It's too overwhelming. It's too big. I mean, some people can't. I can't. It's just too big. But yeah. And then, I mean, I was nervous for sure, but at the end of the day, you just got to go and see if you can.
That's some great advice right there. Focusing on just little tidbits of the trip rather than looking at the big picture. Because I know the big picture can be quite overwhelming for sure. So that's actually some great advice for the women out there who are thinking of biting off something like this to do. Why the Mississippi River? What drew you to this trip? And yeah.
Well, when we had done all of this, it's all connected with the coast, right? Everything stems from the coast. So when we did the coast, so when we did do the coast, we had talked about the East Coast is part of a water trail called the Great Loop, and it's cruised a lot in boats, and a lot of paddlers have done it. But so it's the East Coast. Well, this is going the other way. It goes the other way because the Mississippi flows down. But it's the East Coast, the Great Lakes, Mississippi River, and then you connect it back across Florida to the East Coast. So it's a loop. So the Mississippi is another part. And we had talked about maybe doing, the Great Loop, but in pieces, since we had done the East Coast. So it was already kind of in the back of my head. It was never a goal in and of itself. I had never thought, it's like, I really want to paddle the Mississippi River. It's like, so it just started as a piece of a greater whole. And I had a friend that was paddling it at the time I was thinking about doing it. So I hit him up. I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. He was super stoked right off the bat. He's like, you have to do it. It's amazing. It'll be the best experience of your life. And I guess I'm doing it.
How long did you plan for this trip? I mean, was this 6 months? Was this a couple weeks? Like, how long did it take?
Mute. It took me, when I really locked in and really started planning, it was probably about 6 months. There was a lot of general thinking about it before that, where I was just kind of deciding if I was going to go or not, because it kind of evolved. It's like, yeah, I think I'm going to do the Mississippi. Yeah, and then eventually, as I was talking about thinking about doing it, just kind of morphed into, yeah, I'm doing it. Which is kind of how things kind of work in my thought process. Anyway, I'm like, if you just talk about doing it long enough, eventually you'll actually do it. Even if you're not sure, just say you're doing it, and eventually you'll actually do it. So yeah, but when I really locked in and started looking at charts and what I was going to need and the time of year and contacting groups and everything, it would probably run about 6 months.
Nice. I know, I agree with you on that philosophy of just saying that you're going to do it and it probably will happen, because that's what I do. I say it out loud to my friends. So somebody will ask me, wait, didn't you say you were doing that? And then oh, yep, I've got to do that now. So it kind of makes you go in that direction, right? So I know, women often have fear when they're approaching something new. And I got to ask this question: paddling down the Mississippi River alone as a woman, that would be a fear of mine. How did you get over that, or how did you tackle that during your trip, before going on your trip? And were there some scary moments while you were on your trip?
Yeah, there were a lot of kind of trippy moments and scary moments. Never where I felt threatened as a woman, I would say. I would say the scary moments that I had were, just inherently kind of scary moments. But I mean, unfortunately, it is a reality that being a woman out, especially out by yourself, you do have a certain amount of risk just because of that. And so I did have to keep that in mind. I wasn't super nervous about it. I think I came at it more of a standpoint of just trying to be as prepared as possible for it. So I was very aware. I brought pepper spray with me, that was always available. I was very conscious of where I would camp. If I was camping, I would make sure that I'm isolated as possible, because the greatest risk, whether you're a woman or not, is people, really. While you're out there, it's like wildlife, they don't really want as much to do with you. But yeah, so the people that may just, because if someone's stumbling around the woods at night and they come on your campsite, it's probably not a person you want to talk to anyway. And then being a woman, you're just inherently more vulnerable, because people see you that way, right? And so they have that attitude of, dealing with a woman, rather than if I were 6'5" big old dude. So I would really try to make sure that, like, I would camp on islands rather on the shore. I would really make sure that I wasn't accessible, when I was camping. And then when I would stop in towns and deal with people, just being very aware of my interactions with them and making sure that, I conducted myself a certain way, especially if I'm stopping into a marina and having a bar on like a store, or having a beer on a stormy day or anything like that. But just being hyper aware of, how you're viewed and the kind of vibes that you're getting off, and keeping it very, kind, but making sure there is a definite distance.
So for safety purposes, planning, and I know this goes back to planning, and also during your route, did you have a float plan? How did that float plan, how did you establish that float plan? Tell us a little bit more about, because this kind of comes with the safety of doing these types of adventure trips. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So I made sure I had all the charts. So the Army Corps of Engineers, once you get around St. Louis, because St. Louis is where not St. Louis, that's where it ends. Minneapolis, sorry, the other end of the chain of locks and dams. Once you get around Minneapolis, that's where they start. That's where the first lock and dam is. That's where the real commercial aspect of the river really begins. So above Minneapolis, The Minnesota DNR, Department of Natural Resources, maintains a water trail. So they have these great charts. They have specific campsites along the way. So you kind of have to go by those, and everything is broken down into river miles on the Mississippi River. Unfortunately, the river miles don't match up between the different charts, which makes it a little interesting, but it's divided into 3 sections. You have the headwaters, you have the upper Mississippi, which is Minneapolis, and then you have the lower river. So all those charts, they don't necessarily line up with each other. They kind of start over again. So that makes it a little interesting. But it's just a matter of, on all the charts, everything's listed as far as your river miles. It tells you where like your bridges are, your big crossings for any kind of thing. They show you where like the ports are for the different tows and all of these things. So it's just a matter of a combination of looking at all the charts and getting the most information you can get from that information, just that kind of raw data, and then talking to people. So there's a whole community of people that have paddled the river before, and just getting in contact with them and finding out, okay, what do I need to keep an eye out for? What are the challenges that I'm probably going to be facing? And just get an idea of what you're going into as best you can.
Did you call in your float plan at night? Like when you landed somewhere, was there somebody that you called to say, yep, I got here? Or did you just do that periodically through your trip?
No, I did, not because it was necessarily, it wasn't my idea. Because my GPS is set up, the GPS I use the, it's now Garmin InReach Explorer. It used to be DeLorme when I got it, but it has a live tracking feature. So you can literally, anyone can log on and see my GPS points and see where I got. Now my mother, on the other hand, it was not good enough. So I did have a mandate that I would check in every morning and every night and let her know that I was safe. That I was on my way. Oh yeah, she was all about it. So I did, and it does make sense, to check in, but it was not my original intention to have a check-in every day and every night. But yeah, so I did wind up doing it though.
So super quick, scariest moment on the Mississippi River, best moment on the Mississippi River.
Oh man, scariest moment was definitely it was my fault. It was a stupid decision on my part. I went over a spillway. So probably my greatest disappointment on the Mississippi River was realizing when I got there that I was not allowed to lock through the locks and dams, which is what I was most excited about. I had paddled on rivers and I've gone on these, great adventure with the coast, but I had never gone through a lock and dam. So I was like, oh. I get there, they're like, no, sorry, no paddle boards. I'm like, oh, because I don't have sides. I'm not contained. I don't have walls. I understand I don't have one other. But some of the dam crews, they were very helpful. And they told me that, well, some of the dams, as you get further down, they don't have a full dike all the way across the river. You just have a spillway. And then if the water's high enough, you can just scooch right over the spillway. Well, I had to portage over a couple of spillways previous to that. And they're just essentially concrete barriers. And the ones that I had gone over before were level. There's no drop. There's just literally like a concrete pad. You go over, you go to the other side. And the water level was the same on both sides. There might have been like an inch or two difference, but nothing that even if water was going over it, there wasn't any kind of elements that would create a sketchy situation. Until the one that I decided to actually paddle over, the water was just high enough to get over the spillway. There was probably maybe like 8 inches to a foot of water going over. And as you're coming up to it, you're going fast, right? It's like any water going over a barrier is going to pick up speed. Well, this did have a drop. So it essentially had turned into, rather than this little just kind of bump I had to go over, now I was dealing kind of like with a mini low head dam situation, which is, I mean, the most dangerous thing you can have on a river, right? Like people die in them every year. So, but at this point, when I see that it drops, there's nothing I can do about it at this point. You're going too fast. So I just sat down. I took a deep breath. I kind of lined myself up, and I just got ready to paddle, you know, as hard as I could at the bottom to bust through. So I go over the spillway. Thankfully, it's shallow enough to where like I can reach the dam. I can reach the barrier with my feet. The fin scrapes along the spillway as it goes over, but immediately as I hit the turbulence at the bottom, it flips my board sideways against it, and thankfully, because it was so shallow, I was able to just push off the barrier and straighten out and paddle out of it. But it was so sketchy, and I mean, it's one of those things, like, just don't do it. Just don't do it. So yeah, I was really lucky in that situation. And I was done for the day. I was like, no, I was gonna keep going for a few miles. I got through that. I'm like, no more. I'm over it. Bye. And I pulled off the water and I set up camp and I made hot chocolate. But then the most exciting, oh man. I mean, probably the end, right? I mean, it's probably the easiest answer, but it's also probably true, but it's also kind of the saddest moment, you know, because you accomplished this great thing that you set out to do, but also you've been doing it for long enough that that's your life now. You know, it's this beautiful, simple existence of all you have to do during the days, you know, go from point A to point B, and, you know, you get to watch the sunrise every morning and then the sunset every night with a cup of coffee in your tent, and it's beautiful. So it's, you know, this really crazy mix of emotions, but yeah, so the best and the worst for sure.
Nice. Was there any moment on your trip, either down the coast or the Mississippi River, that you were like, no, done, I can't go on, but this is crazy, like, and then you had to really, a type 2 fun moment where you really have to dig in, you know, and be like, ugh. Anything like that come to mind for either trip?
Yeah, a lot. There's always highs and lows, right? It's, I don't know if, I mean, I don't think it's possible to have something to do something that extensive, right? Even if it's just time-wise, you can't go through a certain amount of time and not have a low moment, at least one. If you only have one, I think you are doing very well and you have a very positive outlook on everything. But there are really bad days. Things start to hurt, gear breaks, you just have bad luck one day, it rains for days on end and you're just stuck. So yeah, you're tired, you know, things just happen. You just have low moments. And yeah, it's just a matter of just accepting, okay, this is a bad moment, but I'm just going to let it be a bad moment. And because I'm very much a realist when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm not the person that's going to be, you know, like, no, we have to be positive, you know, no. I'm like, no, it's a bad day and it's okay that it's a bad day because that's just what it is right now, but I'm not going to hold on to it. I'm going to get through the bad day and, you know, hopefully tomorrow will be a better day. But the social aspect of all this stuff, like the people you meet along the way, the people that you're in contact with along the way, do such, like, a huge amount of, like, just being there and supporting, and not because they're like, oh, she needs support, but just because they're excited for you, right? And it's like, and they're involved in everything. And so just to be in contact with them and see how excited they are and everything, it really helps kind of build you back up and be like, okay, no, it's like, We can do this. We can get through it. It's going to be fine. Because, I mean, excitement and everything, it's contagious. So it helps a lot.
So gear. Let's kind of like change directions here. Gear is everything for these trips, as both you and I know. Talk about some of the gear you absolutely had to have on this trip. Also talk about some of the gear you wish you had on this trip, and maybe some things you might have done differently or the next time for your next adventure. Give us some insight there.
Well, I learned a lot about gear from when we did the coast. So the nice thing about doing an expedition on a paddleboard, the nice and challenging thing in some way, is it forces you to minimize. You can't, unlike a kayak or canoe, which it's easy to just stuff a bunch of stuff in there and really weigh it down. The more gear you have on a paddleboard, the higher you have to stack it, right? Which, you know, makes you one, more top heavy, and then also you're more susceptible to elements like wind and stuff because there's just more surface area. So it really makes you par things down to what you really, really need. So everything's ultralight, right? Ultralight tents, the ultralight everything. I splurged this trip because we went ultralight on literally everything when we did the coast. The sleeping pad, the pillows and stuff like that. I'll tell you what, ultralight sleeping pads are not comfortable. They're just not. So I splurged on like nice, like luxurious inflatable camp pillow and the comfy, you know, bedrolls and stuff like that, because, you know, you want to sleep well, right? So I definitely splurged on those, but everything else worked out really well. The only kitchen things I just brought a kettle to boil water. All the cooking I did was just over a little like micro camp stove that, you know, folds up into the size of about a deck of cards. I brought a speaker this time because you don't have someone to have conversations with, and even when you're by yourself, I feel like talking to yourself gets a little strange. So I got myself a good speaker, so I could like have music and, you know, audiobooks and stuff like that, which helps at a certain point, like connecting with nature and like listening to the sounds of the river and everything. At a certain point, you're like, okay, but I can have music today. It's like, I have communed with nature. I'm good. Like, let's listen to a book. But I don't know. I didn't really feel like I was wanting for anything on this trip. I was pretty well set.
Walk us through your board and show us like how you have it set up, and how you actually. I know this is key. Stacking your gear on your board is key, and also where you put it, the board you use, of course, and go from there.
So I use the Okeanos, the 14-foot by 28. It was nice because they came out with it. Like, it was a brand new board that they just came out with, that and it really is set up for like big, long expeditionary type trips. It really is. I mean, that's what it was designed for, right? It's like the long distance, like go for it touring board. So it deals with loading very, very well. And I did test that out when I got the board. That was my main concern because it is 28. So it's a little, you know, normally I would probably think, you know, you'd want like a 30. So I was a little concerned with it being 28. I hadn't tried it. It's a new board. I hadn't been able to try it or anything. So when I got it, I loaded it up to test it out to see how it did. So I put a bunch of like kettlebells and medicine balls in my dry bags. And I loaded it up and I took it out here by, we went out of Hell's Gate here in New York and went out to City Island. So it's the water out there can be a little interesting. So I wanted to try it in like weird currents and stuff like that. And it managed really, really well. So I was very pleasantly surprised. I didn't have to adjust any of the attachment points. I thought I was going to have to, because when we did the coast, we used the wings, the big wings. And we had to adjust a lot of the attachment points just to make space for what we had, but I didn't have to do any of that with this board, which was amazing. So I had 5 dry bags. So I used Watershed dry bags, which are amazing, absolutely incredible dry bags. So I had my big duffel, and then I had a clear dry bag, big clear dry bag that I had my electronics. So this was bungeed here. Everything was just attached with bungees. I added paracord loops to the attachment points, so I could just attach big bungees to the loops and go up and over. I wasn't trying to put everything underneath the deck elastics, which can be a little limiting. So I put everything here. I attached the big clear dry bag here. All my camping, everything, all the the daily stuff I would get at night would be in the dry bag, the duffel bag. Up in front, I have one day bag, so it lays flat. It's just a deck bag, and I had 2 more big kind of standard roll top dry bags, side to side, and then the deck bag went up on top over the dry bags, attaching at 4 points here, so that kind of held everything down there. I had my spare paddle, my 3-piece, broken down and shoved kind of in between all the dry bags underneath all the attachments. And then in front of those, I had my dromedary bag. I had these really amazing MSR, just fabric dromedary bags, which are water bags. If you don't know what a dromedary bag is. So when they're empty, they don't take up any space. They literally just lie flat. And also, they just kind of slosh around like a water balloon. So they, I can just kind of flop them over wherever I need. So I'd have that sitting on the deck attached to the front of those dry bags. And then my day pack of water, my hydration pack with a straw and everything would be on top of that dromedary bag. Yeah, it's a lot. So I had about 100 to 120 pounds of gear with me at all times, depending on how much water I was loaded with at the time.
So you mentioned, Bungee versus QuarterLED, and I'm assuming, because being familiar with packing boards for multi-day trips, that possibly for your coast trip, you might have chosen QuarterLED instead of the Bungee, or did you use Bungee there too?
We did use Bungee. Mostly, I think honestly, it was just for ease of use. We didn't have to worry about tightening and loosening anything. We literally, you just hook it onto one loop and you just stretch the heck out of it over to the other, and it held everything down really securely. We didn't have to worry about things moving at all, but I think it was just simpler to use the Bungees.
For those of you out there watching, there is a difference between Bungee and QuarterLED. Bungee obviously has stretch, so when you're packing underneath your board, there is an easy access. You can get to your equipment fairly easy. QuarterLED, sometimes, if you're really going out in conditions where there's potentially a hazard of flipping, if you flip your board with fully geared and Bungee on it, your Bungee stretches. And then it becomes very hard to flip it back, and actually you can lose gear too that way. So sometimes some adventure paddlers choose QuarterLED because you can really cinch it down and keep it down, and other adventure paddlers choose Bungee. I go back and forth between both. That's why I was asking you, LouAnne, which you prefer. Sometimes ocean, I like QuarterLED, but when LouAnne and I have done the Paddle to Climb trip together, God, now for 4 years, I think it is, 4 or 5 years, except for this year. And we use Bungee just because it's easy to get things in and out of. So what was your favorite piece of equipment? Would you say that would be your speaker?
I mean, probably. I definitely used it the most, for sure. That was probably what kept me sane, just for entertainment value. So, and it, that was my luxury item, my pure enjoyment item, where it didn't, I mean, there's no real function to it besides keeping me happy. So yeah.
Were you lacking a chair or anything?
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, actually, totally. I remember probably the biggest thing I would have wanted. The hard part with chairs and why I didn't bring one is because they tend to be somewhat cumbersome as far as where they are. And then some of the lightweight chairs and stuff I've seen are just, you know, they're not all that great. You know, you kind of sacrifice structure for, so that's why I chose not to. But then meeting up, I ran into a couple of different paddlers that were doing the trip as well along the way, in various different vessels. And they all had chairs. And they all looked so comfortable sitting around like a campfire or whatever in a chair. So yeah, definitely, you know, look into that for the next one. Because there is something to be said for not having to sit on the ground all the time. You don't always have a convenient log or piece of driftwood to perch up on. So there is something to be said for that for sure.
So what is next for you? What do you have on the horizons for adventures? Anything planned? Have you verbally said out loud, I'm going to do blah, 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 yeah, next? Have you made that move yet?
Not yet. I have a list of things that I would like to do, for sure. And then, but none of them have really presented themselves as the next thing, right? And I don't think it's a matter of just checking things off. Like there's a time for everything. So just like I would like to do the Gulf Coast as well. I would like to do the Northwest Passage someday. Both of those are longer than what I've done before. I mean, the Northwest Passage is definitely longer and will take a lot of planning and some funding. But yeah, as of right now, just back to, I guess, normal life and seeing what presents itself next.
You brought up funding, and I know, just kind of backtracking here, this is a question that a lot of people have asked me about some of your trips. How do you take off, like, you know, work for these extended period of time to do these trips? Like, how do you get to this point? How do you plan it and make it work in your real life situation? Tell us a bit more about that.
It's a challenge for sure. You can't disappear for months at a time without sacrifice, right? Like I don't have what most people would consider like security by any means. Thankfully, the jobs that I have allow me to take off big chunks of time like that, guiding and personal training. I'm lucky enough to where I've had a number of clients who are very understanding about the things I want to do, but I've also lost a lot of clients along the way because it's just, you know, how it is, right? When you decide you're going to walk away for an extended amount of time, you can't expect things to wait for you. You just can't. So you have to be okay with that risk. And for me, I am. So, but that's not for everyone. You know, also longer term opportunities, things that would require, you know, year-round presence. I've had to pass on several of those because I can't expect someone to sign me on to a project or into anything like that and then me walk away, and then, you know, just holding that opportunity for me. You can't expect that from people because they have to look out for their own interests. So yeah, it's hard. It definitely is. And then so I save as much as I can. I try to connect with brands for like the soft gear and get deals or anything like that to make it as affordable as possible. And then fundraising also helps along the way. It allows for because I'm not big on just asking people to support my trip for the sake of supporting my trip. I want to do that. You know, if I'm going to take the trip, I'm going to make it happen. But with fundraising, you're able to kind of build it in. So when I fundraised for this trip, and we did the same thing for the coast, 2/3 of whatever fundraising went to the cause for the Mississippi was Rivers for Change, who also gave me a micro grant. They have a Source to See grant every year, so they gave me some funding for the trip, which helped me support. So I thought it'd be great to support them in turn. So 2/3 of the fundraising went to Rivers for Change, and then 1/3 went to support the trip. So you're able to kind of have a little bit of both, because it is expensive. And not only is it expensive on the front end, but then you're also not making any money in the meantime. So it's definitely a balancing act, and then starting over when you get back. So it's
so many good stories, so many exciting things. What has all this done for you? What has paddling brought to you with all these adventures that you've done? What are some of the rewards?
I mean, obviously, I've become much more confident in my ability to handle situations. It's given me really great perspective for everything across the board, as far as when things get tough or anything like that. I think it's given me a pretty good just mental fortitude and, you know, kind of a solid equanimity when handling situations. And then it's just a real appreciation for just what you don't need, you know? It's like we get so distracted with just things, and then to be able to go and just disappear, and it's so simple, you know? It's like you really don't need any of it. It's nice, but there's something just so beautiful and peaceful about just having less and just less to worry about. And so it's given me a lot of peace, you know, while I'm out there, and letting you just kind of rediscover yourself and what's important. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing experience. I mean, you can't even say how much it gives you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I look forward to some of our future adventures. LouAnne and I had the pleasure of hanging out and doing some land adventures, ice climbing and rock climbing. And like I mentioned before, she's a staple on my paddle to climb trip, and we're fingers crossed for next year. No COVID, we hope. But thank you for joining us. We appreciate you giving us the inspiration to go out there and explore. And you've done some amazing things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is awesome. Awesome. And I am super stoked for being able to get out for more adventures again once we're able to. Soon.
Yes, soon. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you soon on the next SIC Talk Story.